This is When Science Speaks, a new web series profiling innovative and interesting people working in science and technical fields, from academia to industry to the nonprofit world. We explore how to be a powerhouse advocate for science and your research, how to advance your career in meaningful ways that make you happy, and how to push back on the ongoing assault on science and other related issues of interest happening in the world.
Well, hey everyone, it's Mark Bayer, and you are tuned to When Science Speaks. Thanks so much for being here on this episode. This episode is brought to you by Bayer Strategic Consulting in Washington, D.C., which helps scientists and engineers get funding, advance their careers, and build key relationships. Such a great pleasure to have Jenny Rowe on the show today. Jenny's had a fascinating career journey so far. She's worked with 4 companies like Applied Biosystems and Proctor Gamble as a college student and commercialized her own invention without a patent. As Jenny describes it, she's been coached by super connectors and learned how to build human relationships to solve problems, which is her goal to enable everyone to be able to do that for themselves. She's co-founder and CEO of CuriousReactor, a SaaS platform that makes human connections that matter. Jenny also is co-founder of Flydea, which is a research tool development and consulting firm founded and led by a group of scientists who believe that skilled bench scientists should not have to spend their days doing manual and repetitive tasks. Flydea is focused on bringing value to the research community by creating tools to automate research processes. Jenny served as a postdoctoral fellow at Harvard Medical School. She earned her Ph.D. at University of Michigan Medical School in cellular and molecular biology and her master's in ecology and evolutionary biology, as well as her BA in zoology and animal biology from The Ohio State University. Welcome to the show, Jenny.
Hi, Mark. Happy to be here.
I would love to start with your career journey so far, which is really, really interesting. So if you could, start by sharing, how you sort of got to this point in your career and sort of how you view your career to date.
Thanks. So my career journey has been, as you can see, in all direction. And I have to say, until getting my PhD, I was really focused on leading an academic career. I grew up in a very academic environment. My father was a professor. And since I was very young, I was fascinated with nature and ecology. And I always thought that I wanted to be a field biologist. So I grew up watching Jane Goodall and Diane Fossey, who led those new era of field biology that you actually immerse yourself in nature and learn about animal behavior. So that was sort of the track that I was at. I moved to the United States to be able to do that type of biology, became one of them, and I was a field biologist for a while. And later on, some of those questions that I had out in the field that really fascinated me was, why do some animals, live different length of life? And diversity of that was really fascinating. So I switched my gear to in medical research at University of Michigan, who has a really good aging research program. And one thing led to another, and that journey took me to opening my eyes and creating different tools in the lab, which later on got commercialized and was exposed to technology transfer, which is commercializing your invention, and a lot of times either small entities or academic institution into commercial places. And that led me to different journeys, but I would say that I got bitten by, entrepreneurial. I had a taste for entrepreneurial journey, and that led me to open up CuriousReactor later on after my postdoc.
So interesting, really cool. I want to start actually with your field biologist days, because we had a chance to talk offline, and you told the story about your time at Ohio State when you were going through the fields, watching, looking around, recording Your focus, I think we had talked about, was on different bird species.
Wild birds, yes,
Yeah,
yeah.
wild birds. And you mentioned something which I just thought was so fascinating, and I know our listeners would be interested in it. If you could share that story, if you're comfortable.
Yeah, so that story was about how I learned to communicate. I think it's really important that scientists get to communicate their ideas and uh, to lay audience. And for me, I think everybody in every career journey they take, they learn the same lessons, but maybe in a different experience. So for mine, what I had to quickly learn, my English back then wasn't very good. I just moved from South Korea to United States. I was a field biologist, and my task was to capture some of these wild birds out in the field and bring it to the lab to make their physiological measurement. The challenge there was I had to go through a lot of private farmland, and it wasn't. It was quite difficult for me to. It could look like I was trespassing somebody's farmland, and there are a few times that people will come out, drive their truck loaded with rifle, and ask me what I was doing in their land, which is very
Right.
intimidating.
Of
And
course.
that experiences really led me to figure out how to quickly communicate why I was there and I wasn't a threat to them. And just by starting, I was studying all these wild birds, just didn't work because they didn't care. They
Hmm.
wanted to know who I was and what I was doing there. So that iterative process actually got me to realize people need to care about me first before
Hmm.
they get to hear about what I was working on. So, and the great thing about being in Ohio State is that you can bond with anybody with Ohio State football. I didn't know
Hmm.
anything about football, but I got to learn how to, sit on the sidewalk and talk about football for a
Right.
while being in Ohio. So I got to do that. And once they cared about, I was a student and, I could talk about what they care, which is what's coming up the next Saturday game. I was able to communicate what I was studying. And later on, a lot of those relationships turned into great. Some of the farmers will call me sometime and say, I saw these, wild birds that you were spotting.
Love
Could
it.
you come over? Yeah, could you come over and, catch them? So it was really great relationship, but I had to quickly learn that skill.
I just love that story. I have to tell you, Jenny. I mean, first of all, lots of pressure involved there. I mean,
It's the best way to learn.
right. Literally, you've got to perform on the spot, and then how you focus. I think you mentioned something about how the car you were driving had like Ohio State football stickers on it, or you wanted to make sure that message, that connection was there and clear.
Right. Yeah. So I quickly learned there's a couple of ways to communicate. One was I got all these Ohio State football magnet around my car. So I
Hmm.
attached to them whenever I went out to the field just to let them know that I'm from Ohio State and
Right,
I'm
right.
not here to trespass their land. Yes.
And you started with that, as you were saying, that was
Correct.
really that kind of connection. And then the other aspect of it was that it was an iterative process, right? You probably, it took you maybe a little bit of time to figure out what was the right sequencing, of how you were going to explain it. You probably also felt pressure, like time pressure. You didn't have a lot of time to get this message across,
Right.
facing a potentially angry person who might be armed.
That's right. Yeah. So I think I can't remember exactly what it was, but I started by telling them what type of research that I was doing. They could not care less what type of research I
Right,
was doing.
right.
But the second time around, I was like, oh, actually, the first person responded, their face lit up when I said I was a Ohio State student. So
Uh-huh.
next time that I saw a different farmer, I just said, I'm a student from Ohio State and I'm doing this today around your property. I won't cross these property lines. And yeah, those things I learned quickly just by watching people's reaction
Mm.
and picked up the things that people positively responded and eventually constructed the story that were able to lead various relationship that was very fruitful and meaningful for me.
Wonderful. And like that relationship aspect of it, which just makes it even greater. So let's shift a little bit to CuriousReactor and, what led you to start it? What are your plans for the future of the company? And how does it benefit scientists, who are, let's say, for example, often introverts?
Yeah, so CuriousReactor is a SaaS platform that make human connections. And the reason that I built that company the way I did was the real mission that I really want to solve is how do I create more channels for nascent ideas or solutions that people have developed either in academia or in different entities to make a real impact in the world.
Hmm.
And the sad statistic is that if you're in academia, a lot of the patent ideas, maybe 1 to 5% of them ever gets out. And even if it gets out, it takes 10 to 25 years to actually make an impact. And in my discipline, in life science, that could be, human saving therapy. So
Right.
for me, when I first learned the statistic, I just thought that most ideas are not good enough. And, that's about the time that maybe take, time for preclinical ideas to get to clinical research and get to human in the commercial market.
Hmm.
But more and more I learned about it, that's actually not true. And there are many anecdotal cases that time can be shortened to 5 to 6 years instead,
Hmm.
or more ideas can come out. And what I realized is that it all came down to human connection. So if you can remove a lot of time people looking for uh, resources or other people, because a lot of these innovative ideas to get to the market, it's a huge undertaking of many, many different people with different stakeholders. And you can't possibly know everybody. And you rely on your network to
Hmm.
find what you need at the time. So I thought the biggest impact that I can make in the technology transfer space is to make that human connection more efficient.
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah, and that leads beautifully from your story too, where you were making these human connections in the fields of Ohio.
That's right.
You also touched upon the tech transfer system, as you explained, the sort of commercializing from research to a product for sale. And you believe, and you kind of alluded to it here too, about the tech transfer system being broken, or at least it could certainly be improved with this serendipitous connection that you described taking such a long time. People are trying to find others who fit what they need. I'm wondering if you could talk to us a bit more about that, because of course that kind of connection is just so unpredictable. That's why it's serendipitous.
Correct. Yeah. So um, one of the most impactful story that actually shaped my thinking on this was again, serendipitously, I ran into a panel discussion about 3 years ago. It was during Hub. Um, Boston has a lot of conferences, and one of them invites a lot of different thought leaders in life science and medical
Hmm.
research. And one of the panel discussion was about 4 people. Lung cancer survivor was there, and 3 other people who have intertwined their lives with this patient to create 3 different drugs along the way. And her name is Linnea Olson, and their story was just so inspiring to me because um, how they have met was all serendipitous,
Hmm.
and the connection was something like Linnea's friend's husband introduced her to the oncologist that happened to be running the right, clinical trial, and that person was connected already to pathologists who have predicted uh, the caveat of that drug approach, and later came up with different type of drug and led her to 3 different phase 1 clinical trial, and she's still with us, and she was
Hmm.
supposed to only live 3 to 5 months at the time. So
Wow.
I realized that although that story is so sexy, at the same time, are we going to really rely on serendipitous human connection to save people's lives? And I just thought that is just too sad reality. So I wanted to do something about it, and I realized that maybe there's something that I can't scale myself by making all these professional connections to people, but there's something that computer can do for us, at least do some early on heavy lifting on who should meet who. And that led me to create an algorithm that predicts that.
That is fascinating. And that story as kind of the origin story, one of the things that really led you to do that is just great, just so meaningful and makes such a big difference. You were able to work as an undergrad, when you were in college, and do some very high level research and things that you actually worked on that became products and so forth. And you have so much expertise and background in this area that I'd like to ask about your thoughts on when an idea is worth patenting and when maybe it's not worth patenting.
Yeah, so I think I think that one underlying lesson that I learned from all those experiences before I get into the detail is that you should always say yes to experience that you think it's kind of unfit to your own your own plan. So I always tell students, say yes to experiences you think it's weird, and then say yes to opportunities to show off whatever you learned from those different experiences. So a lot of the experiences that I had, that I got to collaborate with industry leaders and later on commercialize my own devices that I created in the lab, all comes down to very few experience that seeded my future, and that was learning how to create tools in the lab using electrical and mechanical engineering type of skills. And I was very lucky to be in the lab where my advisor, undergrad and master's thesis advisor, was very good at. So he was a really good DIY scientist, and I got to learn how to make things under his supervision. And I was a zoologist to begin with. I was a field biologist, but I've learned those skills and led me to, whenever I run into a problem in the lab, instead of either being stuck or ask somebody else, I would just go to Home Depot and buy a bunch of stuff and we'll create a solution out of it. And it was useful to do my own research, but later on, some of them became useful for other people. So that led me to commercialize it with the industry partner. And it wasn't a big enough market for me to patent it. But at the same time, what I realized is that to commercialize, you don't really need a patent if your market is small. So you can own the entire market without patent, and that led me to commercialization.
So helpful and valuable for listeners who might be thinking along the same lines. I want to ask you as we wrap up, we're still in the throes of this pandemic, and we're talking about connections in a theme of our discussion, which of course I'd love to talk about, could talk about for a long, long time. And I want to ask, first of all, if you find that the COVID-19 circumstances are accelerating connections.
Yeah, I totally believe so. And I've experienced it firsthand, and I got to observe many different initiatives that started from small connections that expanded. And I think the important thing is that I think connections always need to kind of start with a very personal level that you can emotionally connect. And I think the fact that we have a pandemic have become a common denominator for a lot of people to resonate with each other and work on collaborative and mission-driven work together. So when pandemic first hit, at least within the scientific field, the thing that I have observed was just amazing, such as scientists starting to collaborate on sequencing SARS-CoV-2, releasing that information freely, either on bioRxiv or Slack channel, so that we can help each other innovate and come up with a solution collaboratively and not worry about ownership of that idea at all. So if you were to think about patent versus collaborative work, it's like almost opposite of each other, right? So you have your own idea and you protect it and nobody else can use it, versus here's my idea, who else has other idea, who can, you know, learn from what they found or shoot off from that original idea to something else. And acceleration of that collaboration within when first COVID arrived in the United States and how scientists were able to collaborate, it's just amazing. And I think like coming up with different testing, coming up with different ways to ameliorate our supply chain for PPE shortage and stuff like that, it's been quite inspiring to watch. And I hope that what we learned from those different working groups across different entities and different countries actually would stay with us and make a longitudinal impact.
What do you think the likelihood of that is, Jenny?
I think it has a pretty good chance, at least for, I think everybody have benefited from seeing faster communication, let's say in scientific publications. So as you probably know, and listeners also know, that being able to repeat somebody's scientific finding hasn't been very great for the last 15, 20 years. Part of the problem is that we put emphasis on novelty too much, rather than being able to actually put quality science out. And what back like a year ago, what happens is that you shelter your idea until it comes out in published journal, which takes about 2 to 3 years for review and revision process. And by the time it hits the public, it's, as a science, old history that you already have moved on from that science. And there's about a 3 to 4 years of lag time that people could have collaborated. Now that we're actually bypassing that process and people are freely sharing what they are finding, and other people are trying to replicate what you have found, you basically are like bypassing some of the peer review process and replaced it with actual repetition of somebody else's results. And if if it is true, then we can build upon it. If it is not, we can vet that idea out earlier on. So I think that's really important, and I think that's going to still stick around.
Just so great, these insights and your specific experience, your expertise. Jenny Rowe, scientist, entrepreneur, and super connector. Thank you for sharing and being on the show. It was really, really fun and interesting and valuable.
Thank you, Mark. Thanks for having me.
And listeners, thanks for being here on this episode of When Science Speaks. And I hope you'll be back next time for the next episode of When Science Speaks.
This is When Science Speaks, a new web series profiling innovative and interesting people working in science and technical fields, from academia to industry to the nonprofit world. We explore how to be a powerhouse advocate for science and your research, how to advance your career in meaningful ways that make you happy, and how to push back on the ongoing assault on science and other related issues of interest happening in the world.